Gospel reading I read from the Gospel of Matthew, beginning in the 21st verse of the 5th chapter, these words of Jesus. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift, therefore, before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery," but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord." But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Yet your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. The corner cafe was eerily silent as the moments ticked on the clock toward closing time. There were just 3 tables occupied and so few occupants in the room. The only sound left was the clanking of well-used silverware on well-used plates. Outside it was dark and the traffic had been stilled. The sign had already been flipped to closed, discouraging anyone else from coming in the last few moments. Each of the occupants of the Mountaintop Cafe found themselves silently in their own thoughts, in their own worlds. First was the server, who stood at the countertop, cleaning it off, wiping everything down, making sure the last few things were done so she could leave. As she watched, it was almost time to leave for the day. 14 minutes to be exact as she watched the time, until she could go home or somewhere. She wasn't sure if she was going home tonight. It had been a rough morning. She was already embarrassed enough that she had to move back home with her mother after she had graduated from college. But it got worse day after day after day as their fights escalated about everything and anything, about politics, about faith, about what to watch on Netflix at night. They fought and they fought and they fought. And she didn't know how long she could stand it, but she didn't really have anywhere else to go. This was her only job and her only source of income. The fights escalated day after day after day, and this morning was the mother of all mother fights. Her mom had made some snide comment about getting a real job, and she just went off. She said, "I've had enough. You are a fool if you think that this is about me. This is all about you." She blamed her mother for all of the problems in her life. She blamed her for the fact that her mismanagement of their family funds meant She couldn't go to a bigger college with a more prestigious name so she could get a better job. She blamed her for the fact that she had run off her father 15 years earlier. She even blamed her for the fact she ran off her boyfriend at Thanksgiving when she couldn't leave well enough alone and stop talking about politics at the dinner table. 2 weeks later, he was done with her, and she was heartbroken. She blamed her mother for everything that had gone wrong in her life, and she let her know in no uncertain terms that morning. And so, tonight, she wondered, would she be able to go back home? Or would she have to phone a friend and ask to couch surf tonight? Maybe even longer. As she cleaned the same portion of the countertop again and again and again and again, across the way at table 8 sat a young man, well dressed in a suit, nice hair, gorgeous smile. He was keeping one eye on the clock ticking down and the other eye on the waitress across the way. He was sitting there in that cafe because he was staying at the hotel across the way at a conference that was going to be starting the next day. He had a presentation at that conference, so he was working on his laptop, clicking away as he got ready for that presentation, but he kept his eye around the room as he did. He had always been on the lookout. He wondered what the night would bring, but he knew that he would be taking somebody back to his hotel room that night. He just didn't know who it would be. Ever since his wife kissed him at the airport on the way out, he had been on the lookout for who it might be. The girl that caught his attention, and she caught his in first class on the way back to his seat on the plane. The hotel attendant who went out of her way to help him when there was still a long line of other people to be taken care of. And now this waitress who kept giving him looks as they flirted as he ordered his food. He knew he could have any one of them. He just needed to pick. He was an investor, and that's what his presentation was on the next day. And he noticed the irony as he closed his laptop. You see, his job was to tell people about all the different complicated things in the world of investing and all the different things that you had to go through and the choices you had to make. But sometimes you just had to reach out and grab what was in front of you. And he smiled, for his life was the same. He was good looking, and he knew it. And so he went through his life looking for who his next conquest would be. He could line up a list, just like a spreadsheet, and sometimes he knew you just had to grab whatever was in front of you. For him, women were not people, they were playthings, conquests for him. And so he had a decision to make, a difficult one. He decided it would be the woman in first class who was staying at the hotel in room 405, he knew. The woman at the front desk who would be getting off in a couple hours. Or maybe he should just grab the one right in front of him and get this waitress when she's off here in just a few minutes. Sometimes it didn't even matter what happened once he got back to the hotel room. It was just the fact that he could do it that gave him the power. He had noticed when he came in an attractive young woman just a few tables down from him, but it complicated things a little bit that she was sitting with her husband, so he decided to leave well enough alone. In fact, she was sitting with her husband, but she was not sure that he would be her husband much longer. The couple had come into this cafe far away from where they lived, far away from anybody they knew, and now the quality of their marriage seemed about as dubious as the quality of meat on the hamburgers that they had eaten for dinner. And in fact, they had been there since dinner, They had spent time talking about some of the things that really made them angry about their relationship, about their marriage. They had only been married about 2 years, but it had always been tumultuous throughout the whole time. They were actually pressured by her parents into getting married when they found out that she was pregnant. When they lost the baby late in the pregnancy, that grief added to the feelings of resentment and shame and anger and doubt that they both had about whether or not they wanted to hang on to this marriage or not. And so they built up all of this resentment about who the other person was and why the other person wasn't doing what they were supposed to do, keeping score left and right day after day, trying to beat the other, to say, well, I'm not going to be the one that's wrong, you're the one that's wrong. Every day was like this. Finally, they decided, we have to hash this out. Let's go hide at the cafe, and boy, did they hash it out. When the cafe was full of people, they let their voices go as loud as they could, and they just called each other every name in the book and said, you have done this to me, and you have done this to me. And the anger built higher and higher and higher, and now there's nothing left to say. But they just couldn't go home. In fact, he had offered, why don't you go home? Take the car, go take care of the dogs. I'll go walk across the street to the hotel and spend the night there. You can think, I can think. Maybe we'll figure this out on our own. But whenever either one thought about leaving, they couldn't let them be the first one out the door. They had to make sure the other one was to blame, and so they just sat, looking down at their phones, both batteries to single digits, as they watched the clock. A few tables down from them was another man, an older man, but also in a nice suit, well-dressed, good-looking. He was also there at the hotel, there for the conference. He was also an investment banker, well-to-do, somebody that knew a lot about investment, knew a lot about trading, and what he had shared over the years had changed a lot of lives and helped a lot of people. But what he never shared, except for just a few people, was how he had made his money. Insider trading, they call it. Sounds pretty innocuous, doesn't it? But to those in the know, it's a dangerous game to play. He made money fist over fist, and yet he was always anxious in the back of his mind. What if somebody found out? What if somebody knew what had happened? What if somebody knew how he had made all of his money? The anxiety built in him. It had already ruined 2 marriages. It had ended so many relationships in his life. He was always clear to be certain about the way things looked. He could blame somebody else. He had plausible deniability, but that anxiety in his heart could not be ridden from where he was and how he lived. And so he always wondered when the authorities would knock on the door in his corner office, when they might take him away. The lies upon lies upon lies woke him up, even after he had fallen asleep in the hotel. Now that he was getting close to retirement, he wasn't sure what to do next. Just got out and wandered around and found himself in this cafe where he sat and drank a rather below average cup of coffee, wondering what he could possibly do next. The server went over to his table to get his corporate business card to pay the bill. And she heard the sound that every server on the planet is terrified of at 5 minutes before closing time, the sound of somebody else walking in the front door. Sure enough, here came a man. She had already turned around the sign. She had a half a mind to turn around and tell him, "We're closed, go home," when she looked and saw who it was. A man incredibly unkempt stood before her. Hair unclean and scraggly all over the place, and the clothes that had been worn maybe for a week. The smell of body odor was already emanating throughout the cafe, and on him this man wore a huge cardboard sign, perhaps cardboard from a place where he had slept or even lived. And on that sign across the front and across the back with big red letters said the words, "Avoid the fires of hell," with little flames decorating all of the letters. Oh boy, she thought. I don't know what he's going to do if I send him out of here. Why don't I just kind of play this easy? And so she offered him a table and said, "Well, what'll it be?" The man took off his sign and set it right by his table. The first table there, almost blocking the front door. And as he sat, he drew his breath and he spoke so the whole cafe could hear every word. He says, "I will only have a glass of water. Even though I know that all the water in the world would not quench the fires of hell." And everybody in the restaurant couldn't hold back their laughter anymore. They laughed at the couple in between them. The young man almost spit out his coffee. The old man swore under his breath. All of them thought how ridiculous this man was and how silly his words were. It was only the server who didn't miss a beat. She said, "One water coming up," and went to fill his glass. At that point, everybody in the room was racing to get the server's attention. How quickly could they get out of that spot? How quickly could they get their check paid, get their credit cards back, and get out of Dodge? But that's when the man spoke again. "A joke. That's what you think I am, don't you? I could see it on your faces as soon as I walked in. A joke. But do you know what I saw when I walked in? I saw a cloud. A cloud of guilt and shame and resentment and anger and brokenness. I saw that cloud hovering above this space, above each of you. And remarkably, nobody laughed anymore. They listened to what he had to say, but it was only the server who spoke in response. She said, "Well, I don't know what you have in mind, but I personally don't believe in hell." And the man with the sign smiled. Not the smile of an apologist or a debater, or not the smile of judgment to pounce, to get in her face and tell her how wrong she was, but the smile of one who cared, one who hurt for everybody in that room, or maybe even for the whole world. With that smile, he responded, "Well, you don't have to believe in hell to live in it. And I can see by the cloud in this room that you're already there. You're living in the pain of the fires of hell, even as you sit in this place. I can see it on your face, the pain of anger and broken relationships, the pain of empty one-night stands, the pain of a broken heart and keeping score, the pain of a life built on a house of lies. And at that point you could hear a pin drop on the greasy floor, for he had their attention in that moment. And he went on. You see, the storybooks talk about hell and with sulfur and with flames and with demons with cloven hooves. And I think there's something less dramatic that captures the reality of hell. You see, hell is eternal isolation. Isolation from the ones you love the most. Isolation from the one who made you. That's what hell is all about. And I think you know about hell. I think you know about it because I think you know about isolation because you live it. You live it every day of your lives, and it breaks you. And at this point, the only sound that could be heard on the mountaintop cafe were the quiet sobs of realization of hopelessness. But that's when the man continued to speak, saying, that's not the end of the story. That's not where the story ends today. Because if hell is eternal isolation, there is a heaven today that I want to tell you about. I want to teach you about. I want to make sure you know what it's all about. Because if hell is about eternal isolation, heaven is about eternal reconciliation. Reconciliation between those whom you have lost contact with. Reconciliation with yourself so that you know what you were really created to be. Reconciliation with that Creator. To know that the brokenness of the world around you is not the end of the story. That is the word you must hear today. That there is a kingdom from that heaven that lives and you can live with. Don't let that get away. Don't let it slip through your fingers, for the power of reconciliation, the power of God's love is in your grasp. And now he was on his feet, standing, walking around to each of the different people in that room. First he went to the counter and laid his hands on it and said, go back. Call your mom. Tell her you're sorry. She is too. Don't let anger isolate you. And he went and he sat across the table from the young man. And he said, stop it, just stop it. You're so empty, you're so lonely. It doesn't make you feel any better. These are people. These are women, not playthings. Treat them as you would be treated. Treat them as you would treat your sister or your wife. Speaking of which, go call her. She misses you terribly when you're on these trips. Don't let lust isolate you. He went and he squatted at the table where the couple was, and he took their hands and he laid them on top of each other. And he said, I know it. It's hard. It's so hard to be vulnerable and to be open and to be honest with each other, to allow another into your heart. It's one of the hardest things that anybody could ever do. I know it, but you're better together than you all are apart. Don't let that go. Don't let resentment and pride isolate you. And he stood at the table of the older man and said, so much pain, so many broken hearts and broken lives. But there's still time, there's time. Don't let it slip away. Tell them tomorrow. Tell them at the conference. Tell them at the presentation. Teach the next generation how to be ethical, how to be moral, how to be upright. Teach them. Live it. Don't let greed isolate you. And he walked back to his table and picked up his glass of water. He said, there is water in this world to quench your pain. There is hope. He drank the glass of water in one draw, set it on the table, and walked out into the night. Now, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowd were astounded at his teaching. For he taught them as one having authority, not as their scribes. When Jesus had come down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. May it be so. Let us pray. God of the mountaintop and God of the valley. God who stands by in the midst of our isolation and invites us to a life of reconciliation. God who is in our midst even as we speak, inviting us to eternal relationship with you. Teach us again what that means in our lives, in our world, in our hearts. Show us your hope. Show us what it looks like as the cloud lifts. In your name we pray. Amen.